Goeienaand, welkom by Fokus. Ek is Lenet Francis. Die dreigende dag 0 in Kaapstad en die droogte in dele van die land is die afgelope tyd groot nuus. Maar daar is ook dele in die Oos-Kaap en die Noord-Kaap waar inwoners 'n reuse waterkrisis ervaar. En sommige kenners meen Suid-Afrika staar op die lang duur 'n reuse watertekort in die gesig. Maar voordat ons met ons gesprek vanaand begin, luister ons na die mening van 'n besorgde inwoner van Kaapstad wat meen dat die Kaapse waterkrisis deur swak beplanning en die lae reënval veroorsaak is nie. Hier is Steven Irwin.
Die huidige waterkrisis in die Kaap word al geruime tyd aan droogtetoestande en lae reënval toegeskryf. Die waterkrisis word ook as die nuwe Kaapse normaal beskryf en doemprofete voorspel selfs dat Kaapstad dalk 'n woestyn gaan word. Die droogte word ook soms as die ergste in etlike dekades beskryf. 'n Afgetrede ingenieur van Kaapstad, Steven Irwin, verskil egter.
I've been looking at the scenery around me, the mountains, the parks, parts that don't get watered by people. You're not really seeing signs of drought, but people's gardens, yes, because of the restrictions on the water. But generally, it didn't seem to ring true to me. And I monitor my own groundwater. I have a pipe especially for monitoring the groundwater and rainwater gauge, which I monitor. And it certainly doesn't seem to be the driest year. And I've been using borehole water for years, so I know when my borehole starts getting low. And it hasn't shown signs of it, which I've had worse signs in previous years. So I thought I'd start looking at some other statistics.
So there is a difference between a drought and a water shortage?
Yes, I mean, a drought indicates lack of rainfall. We haven't had a lack of rainfall. It's obviously a dry period, but we've got a lack of storage. That's the problem. We just don't have enough storage or other sources of water compared to what we used to have.
Volgens Steven het sy eie reënvalnavorsing getoon dat daar in die Theewater Sloofdamgebied, Kaapstad se grootste opgaardam, 7 3-jaar tydperke sedert 1975 was wat laer reënvalsyfers as die afgelope 3 jaar opgelewer het. Hy blameer onder meer diegene wat nie gehoor gegee het aan vroeë waarskuwings dat skerp bevolkingsgroei en stedelike vooruitgang tot 'n watertekort gaan lei.
If you look at individual years, there's been years where there's only been 329 millimeters. The last 3 years we've had 507, 420, 529. So it really doesn't seem to me like this is the worst drought in 1,000 years or 100 years even, or even 33 years.
So why do we have a water shortage then?
Because we don't have enough storage. Because for 23 years the national government, provincial government, the local government keep on fighting different interest groups, the Save the Fynbos groups, various other people have stopped dam projects from going ahead.
Watter rol speel swak beplanning, verstedeliking, 'n gebrek aan onderhoud en klimaatsverandering in die waterprobleme? Die Departement van Water en Sanitasie het onlangs 'n nasionale water- en sanitasiemeesterplan bekend gemaak. Ons praat nou onder meer hieroor met Trevor Blaze, die adjunk-direkteur-generaal vir strategiese en spesiale projekte by die Departement van Water en Sanitasie. En ons probeer ook in Skype-verbinding kom met professor Anthony Turton. Hy is verbonde aan die Universiteit van die Vrystaat se Sentrum vir Omgewingsbestuur en Waternavorsing. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Balza. Let's talk about the assertion that Steven Irwin makes that it's not Mother Nature, it's not climate change, it's just bad planning.
I would disagree with him on that. We've been managing the drought in the Western Cape and in South Africa in general since late 2014. The onset of the drought in the Western Cape, we've seen significant decline in rainfall from 2014 onwards. 2014, our reservoirs were at 100%, and we've had a gradual decline over the last, since 2014 onwards. And if you look at the SABC data which we use for our planning purposes, Region D, which is the area where the city of Cape Town is, has had the lowest rainfall in 2017 since a record of since 1921. And we consequently, as a result of that declining rainfall, have had to implement restrictions on the use of our system. And the restrictions were first implemented in 2016, and we've had to escalate those restrictions on 3 occasions through to December 2017. And each time the City of Cape Town and the other users, and I must state that everyone is focusing on the City of Cape Town, but you need to bear in mind that there are a number of other municipalities which rely on the same system as Cape Town, namely Stellenbosch, Paarl, Wellington, and the West Coast District Municipal Area right up until Saldanha Bay. So our restrictions have been applied to all of those, and that's what we normally do in a period of low rainfall and when we are in drought conditions. I firmly believe, and I've engaged with our scientists, climate scientists in the department, that it is climate change related and it is drought related. With regard to the assertion around planning, I must just indicate that in 2005, we started a reconciliation study for the Western Cape, which we then put in long-term plans taking us from 2005 through to 2030. And in 2006-07, we in fact, after very extensive engagements with the City of Cape Town, agreed to implement the Berg River Dam. And that implementation of that dam went with very strong water conservation and water demand management plan, which the City of Cape Town had to implement over a 10-year period. Now, under normal rainfall conditions, without the drought conditions we have now, that storage, additional storage which was brought on with the Berg River Dam, should ordinarily have taken us through to 2022. The current drought, however, the severity of the drought is pushing back the need for us to do some augmentation earlier than that.
So Mr. Owen's reference that there's not enough storage, is that justified?
Under the current constrained rainfall and drought conditions, it would have been helpful to have more storage. But if I just try and put it into context, the next augmentation...
And simplify it as well, please.
I will do so. The next augmentation project, which we're now advancing, would be a project to take water, winter rainfall from the Berg River Dam and pump it back into the Voelvlei Dam. That would add an extra 25 million cubic meters per annum into that system. Had we had that in place last year and picked up, let's say rainfall was only at 60%, we would have only picked up about 17 million cubic meters of that winter rainfall. What would that have meant where we are now? It would have given us another month's supply. So we would still be under constrained conditions, and we can get past the day zero. As a department, we're able to manage the supply side, the 6 dams which supply the City of Cape Town, but it's incumbent on all of the users in the City of Cape Town and the other municipalities taking water from the system that they cut back on their water demand. If they do cut back on their demand, we can avert the so-called day zero, which the City of Cape Town use. And in fact, our agricultural users in the Berg River and the Rivers rivers have already had their supplies curtailed so that we can stretch the available water for urban use.
Professor Turton, I don't know how much of that conversation you were able to hear and whether you also listened to the assertions of Mr. Stephen Irvin, an engineer, but last year in October, if I'm not mistaken, you predicted that by March next month, 2018, that the water supply in Cape Town in particular would literally collapse. Are you, in your professional opinion, is it as bad as you had feared and predicted then?
Okay, I didn't hear all of that previously. There's very bad audio where I am, but just to correct you, I never predicted anything in March. What I had was a set of data from an engineer who gave it to me because he was very concerned that based on the data they had at that point in time, middle of March looked like the system was going to crash. And that I put that out on Facebook because he was unable to do so, and that then triggered this whole conversation that we're currently having. But day zero as a concept is a construct to manage the crisis, because it's not a situation of there not being any water in the dam. It just simply comes down to managing what available water there is in order to avoid a total system crash.
If you look at the way things have been managed, one of the assertions that the other engineer made also was that there's a lot of game playing, there's a lot of stalling, that there's different interests that needs to be served. And the reason we're sitting with this crisis is because national, provincial and on local levels, everybody is doing their own thing and not really pulling together.
Yes, whenever you get into a stress situation, you start politicizing the problem. That's simply what happens all over the world. It's not unusual to South Africa. No engineer would design a system to fail, and when they are confronted with failure, of course, they start deflecting blame. So the narrative that's been coming out up to now has really been that it's the residents of the city that are at fault. They must just use less water. That's this whole demand management narrative. And while I'm normally supportive of that as a mainstream tool for the management of water resources, under these particular circumstances, it's increasingly less relevant in the sense that you can't squeeze people to the point where they can no longer survive. So that narrative in and of itself is now becoming highly politicized. I'm not saying we mustn't use less water. Obviously, we must use less water. I'm just trying to say that in the process of communicating these complex realities to a wide range of people, many of whom have got different views on these things, the matter automatically becomes politicized, and this is part of the problem we're experiencing at the moment.
We're going to leave it there for the moment. Net hierna praat ons verder met professor Andrew Turton en ons gas hierso, Trevor Balzer. Moenie weggaan nie, ons is nou terug. Ons praat vanaand oor Suid-Afrika se waterprobleme. Ons gaste is Trevor Balzer, die adjunkt-direkteur-generaal vir strategiese en spesiale projekte. Hy is by die Departement van Water en Sanitasie, en op Skype met professor Anthony Turton, wat verbonde is aan die Universiteit van die Vrystaatse Sentrum vir Omgewingsbestuur en Waternavorsing. And just before the break, Professor Turton, Mr. Balzer referred to that these are complex realities, and the way you communicate is essential to simplify, but also to encourage people to comply. So there has been a lot of blame shifting. We've seen it in the Western Cape. We've seen also between national government, Department of Water and Sanitation, and the provincial government in the Western Cape. So who do we blame?
We all have a part to play, and I think it's important to understand that I don't play in the political space. I'm playing in the technical space as a professional engineer, and we have very good liaison structures in place with all of the users in the Western Cape. And for the Western Cape system, the one supplying Cape Town in particular, we have what we call a stakeholder forum, which meets every 2 to 3 weeks, yes, where we monitor the performance of the system and take decisions on a 2 to 3 weekly basis as to how we need to correct the situation if we're not meeting our projected demands. Likewise, in the long-term planning, we have a strategy steering committee that's in place that would have worked with the department in terms of agreeing on the future augmentation projects. And there you've got the City of Cape Town, the provincial government, and all of the relevant stakeholders, including agriculture, as part of that, and agreeing on the augmentation projects as we go ahead. So to say that there's blame shifting between those folk working at those levels, I would not concur with that. Yes, indeed, there's been a lot of politicking around it, but from the department side, and if you look at the decisions that have been made by the minister with regard to the next augmentation project, the full flow project, when we advanced the need to the minister for an urgent intervention to get that project up and running, there was no delay in the minister giving a directive to TCTA to start with the implementation of that project. And in fact, we're currently doing the closeout on the financing for that project, and the designs would be completed by August of this year. So we've acted quite swiftly, albeit in a crisis condition, to get a project advanced which wasn't delayed in any way now.
Professor Turton, why has delivery of water been such a challenge, particularly for government and other departments, and become a burden in many cases to some municipalities?
Well, yeah, look, I think it's a complex issue. It's part of our transition to democracy, and it's in many ways it's part of a constitutional crisis that we are facing. I agree with the other speaker that we need to go back to the technical management of water. South Africa has had highly competent water engineers over a long period of time, and we need to just liberate those people that they can do what it is that they are highly trained to do. Unfortunately, when we became a democracy, we got a new constitution, and that constitution defined certain roles and responsibilities. And while it was a very noble document based on very good aspirations, in the implementation thereof, we've now seen a lot of shortcomings. And one of them was that the responsibility for the reticulation of water at local level was given to municipalities, and the national departments were only responsible for the oversight of that, but also for the management of bulk infrastructure. So there is some sort of shift there, because while the responsibility was shifted down to other areas in the country, the technical skills and capacity did not go with it. So it's as much a constitutional problem as it is anything else.
So how is this new water and sanitation master plan going to address the crisis that we have, that the National Water Act and the National Water Resource Strategy did not address?
Lynette, what we're doing in terms of the master plan is looking at water security through to 2030 to try and fit in with the goals and objectives of the Vision 2030 of the National Development Plan, and also coinciding with the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which also converge in 2030. So what we are doing is to make sure that we identify all of those areas in the country where there are deficiencies, and between the period of now and 2030 that we address those, such that we are water secure by 2030 onwards. So on the basis of the work we've done through the master plan, we've identified that if we, on a do-nothing approach, we could have a shortfall of about 2.8 billion cubic meters per annum. Now, put that into context. Our major dams, which the department manages, our stored capacity in those dams is between 33 and 34 billion cubic meters. So what does that gap mean? It means that we need to provide additional storage equivalent to a Vaal Dam or a Stakfontein Dam or a Charip Dam. Now, that doesn't all have to come from surface water. That water will come from greater exploitation of groundwater. It'll come from greater exploitation of desalination as an option for the coastal cities. It'll also be contributed to by desalinating and making fit for use AMD in the Gauteng, Witwatersrand area in particular, and also dealing with return flows. Now, your return flows are the water that once has been used once by a municipality, goes through a wastewater treatment works, is returned to the stream, and the intention would be that that water gets used a second and third time before you use it, take it back to the rivers. So as reuse, as a reuse strategy. And the other thing that we need to address is the failure of some of the infrastructure at a local government level as a result of poor operation and maintenance. So we would, working with National Treasury, be working towards getting a much better allocation or a set aside for operation and maintenance, where municipalities would be forced to set aside at least 8% of their recurrent budgets to put into operation and maintenance and the protection of existing infrastructure.
Net na die breek vra ons vir Professor Turton of hy dink die inisiatiewe van die regering tans is wat ons nodig het om te keer dat ons met 'n waterdroogte sit of 'n waterskaarste teen 2030. Moenie weggaan nie, ons is nou terug. Die Die waterprobleme in Suid-Afrika is vanaand in die soeklig en ons vra kan 'n landwyse waterkrisis in Suid-Afrika voorkom word. Ons praat met Trevor Balzer, die adjunkt-direkteur-generaal vir strategiese en spesiale projekte. Hy is by die Departement van Water en Sanitasie en op Skype met professor Anthony Turton. Hy is verbonde aan die Universiteit van die Vrystaatse Sentrum vir Omgewingsbestuur en Waternavorsing. And just before the break, Mr. Balzer was referring to ground exploration and desalination. I wanted to find out from you, Professor Turton, was this the most conservative approach that we could have, or aren't we being innovative enough to avert a crisis in 2030?
I think everything that Mr. Balzer said there I can concur with. You know, it's almost music to my ears because at the moment we've been managing water as a scarce resource. So we've managed it under what we call the paradigm of scarcity, and that's about trying to build more dams for river water. We're at a point now where we can no longer really do that under conditions of climate change, and most of our rivers have reached pretty much the limit of what they can be dammed up there. So we now have to go to a new paradigm of abundance. And that paradigm of abundance is based on three simple legs. And it's the first leg is on the recovery of water from waste streams, which is what Mr. Balzer spoke about. The second thing is the desalination of water where appropriate, either acid mine drainage in the mining areas, which has been happening a long time already in the coal fields, not yet in the gold fields, and it still has to happen in a significant way in the coastal cities. And then the third element of that is what I call the conjunctive use of groundwater, where you draw your groundwater down during periods of drought, but then you store water in the aquifer during periods of abundance. Now, those three things together we call the paradigm of abundance. And you know, if that's the case, we can actually use the investment into that infrastructure to literally kickstart our economy again and launch an entire beneficiation economy in the future, where water of different quality is used at different prices, used at different times and different places in the economy. So that's where we're going, and I think all that's happening now is the Cape Town crisis is simply fast-tracking us into that new paradigm.
Are we on track, Mr. Balzer, with that is concerned, with that strategy in place?
Yes, I believe we are. I mean, the strategy in terms of the water mix, using groundwater, surface water, return flows, AMD and desalination was part of our water resources strategy too. And in terms of the master plan, we now are putting in place the actions that need to be taken to reach those objectives. If I could, Lynette, also just briefly just dwell on the fact that Western Cape is not the only area currently under drought conditions. We're still managing a drought in KZN, which we've been managing since 2014. And in the northern parts of KZN, particularly supply from the Goedetrau Dam down to the cane growers and Richards Bay, they're under quite severe restrictions currently. Likewise, the Mgeni system, supplied by Mgeni water through to Mzanduzi and eThekwini, have been under restrictions for a considerable period of time. Other areas of stress are in the Eastern Cape, around Butterworth or Gua, and down Nelson Mandela Bay.
That's unfortunately where we'll have to leave it. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Professor Turton, thanks for joining us. En dankie vir jou tyd, meneer Balzer, waardeer dat jy ingekom het. Ons is volgende Sondag aand om 6:00 terug. Ons verwelkom jou kommentaar, jou tweets en jou voorstelle, veral ook oor hierdie gesprek. Jy kan dit vir ons e-pos na fokus@sabc.co.za. Stuur gerus en besoek ook ons Fokusblad op Facebook. Soek onder by Fokus SABC en volg ons dan ook op Twitter by Fokus ZA. Baie dankie vir die terugvoer en vir die saamkyk. Ons sien jou hopelik volgende Sondag aand om 6 net hier op SABC 2. Mooi week.